Thank you for joining us for this webinar, a Denic Group webinar, an introduction to disruptive innovation. My name is Wayne Willis. I'm joined by my colleague Rob Lewis, who's going to be taking us through to today's presentation. We are from a company called the Denic Group, which is an innovation consultancy. We work with brands and organizations around the world, helping them to develop an innovation strategy and a culture of innovation to help them think differently about the way that they deliver their business today, so that they can future-proof and grow and move in what is a very fast, be agile in a very fast-moving world, particularly when it comes to digital technology. The stimulus really for doing this webinar today is that we are innovation partners for the Waterline Summit. So if you're from the Humber region or the north of the UK, you might know that there's an event called the Waterline, which is set up to tackle decarbonisation and address the challenges of climate change, particularly in the Humber region. But actually as a test bed for innovation in this area to roll out across other parts of the world. And that summit is running all this week, and there's lots of speakers and events and exhibitions and things going on as part of that. And so as innovation partners for the summit, we felt it was important to deliver our own webinar to discuss the principles of disruptive innovation, and how you can apply these methodologies and principles to your own business in terms commercially, in terms of being able to be agile and grow and future-proof and be able to think differently about your offer so that you don't become disrupted, which is happening in all sectors, and COVID's pretty much seen to that for just about every industry. But also with a little tinge towards the green agenda as well, and thinking about how you can use innovation and think differently about your own business's carbon output, and how you can be greener, and help tackle a problem that's ultimately going to affect us all, which is climate change. So we'll be touching upon all that. We do encourage you to, we don't want death by webinar, so we encourage you to ask questions, and we'll try and tailor some of the stuff. This is very much a top level overview, but if there's very specific questions related to your business or your sector or something that you want to know, please fire away and ask us the question in the chat box below, and if anyone's feeling brave, we'll be happy to stop and let you turn on cameras and speak to us directly as well if you'd like to. With that, I think we'll get rolling. So Rob, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks Wayne, thanks Scott. Hi everyone. As Wayne said, we're going to talk about innovation. It's really quite general what we're talking about in innovation, but we're going to slant it towards sustainability and the green agenda, obviously to fit in with the Waterline Summit here. So again, just to reiterate what Wayne said, we'd love to hear what you think about what we're telling you. So please use the chat. Feel free to raise your hand and we'll put you on video and ask some questions. My presentation is probably going to be about 45 minutes long, so we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. We'd really value to hear what you think, and obviously to get the best value for yourselves, please feel free to ask us some questions. So as I said, we're going to give you an introduction to disruptive innovation. We'll give you a climate change slant on that. So obviously climate change is a massive topic at the moment, although it seems to be forgotten a little bit due to COVID. And we know that there are many activists in this area. And we've put a picture of Greta Thunberg on there, which is a fairly obvious link, but clearly what she embodies is the urgency with which we need to act to address the challenges that face the planet. And this genuinely is an urgent issue that we seem to have put a little bit on the back burner in the last 12 months, and certainly been putting it on the back burner since we've known about the issues of climate change and the environment for decades now. But really, it's really coming to a head, and we're seeing a younger generation of people having a voice and really challenging the status quo. And that's what we need to do as a society and a world community, is really look at the way we do things and think about how we do things differently in order to protect the planet and really protect everyone's future as this thing becomes more and more urgent, and cities start to be subsumed by water. And we're sitting here now in Hull. I think 90% of Hull is actually below sea level, so that's the reason why the Waterline project has been initiated from this region. And there's a quote from Greta. It's all about urgency, and really this isn't about whether you like it or not. It's actually a mandatory thing. If we want to survive and we want to prosper, then we really need to address this. And change is coming whether you like it or not. And we need to apply that to everything we do, how we travel, how we heat our homes, the way we work, the way we consume, and that requires a systemic change in everything we do. And at the heart of that is innovation. So we're going to talk about how we can innovate and how we can set ourselves up to address some of these challenges. So if we're going to talk about innovation, the first thing is it's really important to define what is innovation. So no matter what sector you work in, or whether you're looking at climate change or just developing your own brand or products, you need to figure out what is innovation for your business. And I've got a picture of the moon landing. Clearly, putting a man on the moon is innovation, but if that's all that innovation was, then it wouldn't happen that often, because these kind of like landmark things, finding an antibiotic, elucidating the structure of DNA, putting them on the moon, they only happen every so often, because we can't just be making these massive leaps forward all the time. But clearly innovation goes on all the time. We all work in businesses where we innovate to keep our product fresh and to make revenue fundamentally. So we like to think of a definition of innovation as the act of translating an idea into a product that has value for which a consumer will pay. And that product doesn't have to be something you put in a box and sell in the supermarket. It could be a service, it could be something digital, it could be just something that actually enhances your reputation. And the value that comes back actually doesn't necessarily have to be value as in money. It could be reputation, it could be acting as an expert, it could be data, it could be lots and lots of different things. So this definition is pretty flexible, and we could apply it to climate change. So products in the sense of climate change could be a product or a service that saves carbon, and the value that comes back to us might not be in money. In fact, it might actually cost us money to deliver that, but the value is we've got a planet we can live in. So you can see that this definition can work across all different sectors and all different types of innovation. And we're actually going to talk about disruptive innovation today, because disruptive innovation is what we need. We're being disrupted by climate change, and we need to think disruptively to change the way we do things to solve that. Now, we know that lots of different digital things have disrupted incumbent businesses and established ways of doing things, and there are some examples there. So we know that Uber's disrupted taxis, we know that Airbnb's disrupted hotels, etc., etc. But that's not particularly clever. We that's looking at things after the fact. To really understand what disruptive innovation is, we need to work out how to be disruptive, and that is about your approach to innovation. The picture of the person on the screen at the moment is a guy called Clayton Christensen, who was the first person to talk about disruptive innovation in around 2015. So disruptive innovation has entered the vernacular of all business now. If you look on LinkedIn, you'll find loads of jobs with it in the title. You'll find lots of articles. You'll even find it in the press today. So people talk about disruptive innovation, and there are lots of examples of things that have disrupted things. But if we want to be disruptive, we need to figure out how we do that. And fundamentally, there are two approaches to innovation, and I'm going to explain what they are and how they're relevant to disruptive innovation. So firstly, incumbent businesses tend to have an approach to business which is playing not to lose. And by an incumbent business, I mean the guys who are currently in the dominant positions in their markets. They're big businesses, they employ lots of people, they make lots of money, and their brands are successful, their products are bought all around the world, and they keep their shareholders happy. But fundamentally, they're in business to play. Their approach to innovation is primarily playing not to lose the position they're in today. So the people in those businesses are looking to get paid every month. They're looking to get their bonuses. They're looking to get promoted. The things that they do, they're looking to maintain their market share. They're looking to keep their shareholders happy. And fundamentally, their approach to innovation is not upsetting that apple cart. Because really, that's what they're paying. Because they're successful today, they have to concentrate mainly on innovating around not upsetting what they do today. And that's fundamentally a defensive attitude to innovation. And if we put that in the context of climate change, then actually playing not to lose is not going to fix things. If all the big consumer industries continue to make more and more products, encourage consumerism, they're playing not to lose their position in the market, but that's not going to help us in climate change. We need to think completely disruptively to change that paradigm to really address things like climate change. So I mentioned that playing not to lose is one approach to innovation. The other approach to innovation is playing to win. And by that, I mean, and that's embodied by disruptors. So disruptors' approach to innovation is looking at playing to win. They look at different sectors and look at where people are doing things and figure out better ways of doing it. And the reason they can do this is because they're not held back by some of the things that hold back incumbent businesses. So often a disruptor will be a startup. They're not necessarily getting paid. They don't get promoted. They haven't got a boss. They don't have a market share to protect or worry about. And that frees them up to think about doing things in a better way and fundamentally disrupting sectors. So when you look at things like Uber, which we mentioned earlier, if you think about how am I going to disrupt a taxi service, and I haven't got a fleet of taxis and I don't employ lots of people as taxi drivers, the solutions become very obvious using GPS, having a load of self-employed taxi drivers. You can basically deploy the taxi journeys all around the world. They were able to do that because they weren't held back by the infrastructure that they currently operate in and were able to disrupt. So we need to think about this when we look at climate change. So if we're not a large energy company, we're not a large consumer goods company, we need to think about how we use energy in a more appropriate way that's not about defending my existing infrastructure. And if I'm an oil company, I make lots of money out of selling oil, I'm not that interested in electric cars because that's not how I make my money today. Obviously, a lot of these oil companies are now thinking about electric cars and operating in a greener environment for generating electricity. But they could have been doing that 10, 15, 20 years ago, but they didn't do that because they were making too much money from oil. So we need to shake all of this up and act like disruptors. So that's how we think about disruptive innovation. And really, disruptors are what we need to address the challenges of climate change. And we can change the world with our ideas and our thoughts and our intellectual capacity. But we need to be brave. We need to stand out. We need to make a difference. We need to put our heads above the parapet in order to do that. And that's very hard often in certain types of cultures or roles or environments where rocking the apple cart can be a career risk or it'll make you unpopular at work. So we need to free ourselves from all that to become disruptive. So let's just think about the environment that we operate in. Today, no matter which country you are on the planet, we're seeing a massive amount of disruption due to this virus. So for the last 12 months, we can't turn on the news or go to work or do anything without thinking about coronavirus. And we've adapted the way we behave in response to that challenge. It has disrupted us. And actually, as an innovation consultant, I find it quite annoying that it's taken something like that for us to think disruptively and change the way we behave. We want to address climate change. We need to take climate change as seriously as we've taken coronaviruses, and governments need to force and enforce the kind of changes they've done to deal with coronavirus onto the environment. And we need to adapt the way we do business and develop products and services to face that challenge. So as I said, we've seen a massive amount of disruption from coronavirus, but actually our businesses before coronavirus and after coronavirus are always in a turbulent state, permanent flux. There are always things that are buffeting our business. So it might be our competitors just lost a product similar to ours. We've had our factory closed down, or it's burned down, or a new regulations come in place, which has affected our business, or someone's just doing what we're doing, but they're doing it cheaper or more effectively. All of these things are constantly buffering our business. And if we want to be innovative, we need to be able to react to them constantly. Just to check in on that a little bit, this is a quote from Larry Page, who was at one time the CEO of Google, and he was looking at why companies don't succeed over time. And fundamentally, what do they do wrong? And his observation, which we would agree with, is they usually miss the future. So they're doing what they do today, and they're busy making money doing what they're doing today, and they tend to miss out on the future because they're not on the burning platform, which makes them think about the future too much. And a great example of this is Kodak. So this is a really overused example in innovation, so apologies for using it, but Kodak filed for bankruptcy a few years ago, primarily because they were a business that made physical film, and they clung to that. They made so much money out of selling physical film that they never adapted their business to face the challenge of digital. And now we live in a world where you don't buy film. In fact, you don't even have a camera. You just use your smartphone and everything's done digitally. There's a huge irony here that Kodak missed that future. They were actually the guys who invented the digital camera. They built the first digital camera in the 1970s, but never saw why it should be commercialized. And the reason why they were blinkered about that and they missed that future is because they were too obsessed with film. Okay, so it's a really good example, and in retrospect, it seems bizarre that they invented the digital camera, the thing that killed them, but they didn't commercialize it. And you can apply that thinking to any business. Another thing that's driving this is technology. So Technology companies, this is a quote from a guy from JP Morgan, saying every technology company wants to eat our lunch, and I mean every single one of them. What he meant by this is that every single tech company is out there to basically take what we're doing today and doing it differently through technology and basically destroy us. And they don't just want to eat one of our lunches, they want to eat all of them. And we're seeing that with a lot of these tech businesses. So things like Google have a health called Verily, so they're going into health, which is a threat to access with crime. Bupa, Boots, you know, the World Health Organization. We're seeing all these businesses going into other sectors and taking their business, even though they're making loads of money from what they're doing already. So they're thinking about how do they move into other sectors and attack. And a great example of this is Amazon. So Amazon's obviously started as a bookseller, went into other media, and now you can pretty much buy everything. Jeff Bezos is the richest man on the planet, and they've got a really innovative range of products. A few weeks ago in the UK, they just launched Amazon Fresh, which is basically probably exists in some other countries if you're not calling in from the UK. But Amazon Fresh is basically a service where they can provide fresh produce to you within an hour using their Prime network. So this is kind of like really disrupting potentially how we currently buy our produce in the supermarket. So if Amazon's coming into the supermarket sector and selling fresh produce, then Tesco's, Sainsbury's, and all the other incumbent supermarkets in the UK and the world need to take notice of that and be worried about how that's going to affect their business moving forward. It's a great example of a technology company that's challenging in all sectors. You know, we put a picture of the coronavirus and seeing how that's disrupted. We've kind of forgotten about climate change. We've known about climate change for decades now. We know that the ice caps are melting, sea levels are rising, greenhouse gases are accumulating in our atmosphere. Yet we don't seem to worry too much about it. We haven't been as proactive about this particular challenge as we have about things like coronavirus. And why is that? Is it because it's seen as a thing that'll never happen? There's skepticism, obviously, but the received wisdom now is that science supports the fact that climate change is happening. And unless you're a belligerent politician like Donald Trump, then you will have accepted that. So we now need to be innovating now. And going back to Greta Thunberg's message, you know, it's almost too late for us. We're almost at a tipping point where things can't be reversed. So we need to use our ingenuity and use the kind of call to action that coronavirus has given us to innovate in this direction as well. So innovation is really important to us as a species and to the planet. This is a picture of Scott, Robert Scott, the Antarctic explorer. And I really like the message that we're putting on the side here. And it's, you know, make your own future. You know, most businesses spend all of their time obsessing about what their peers are doing. They tend to follow them. So if somebody does something, our business will react and they'll try and go one step further or copy what these guys are doing. You know, to be truly innovative and to be truly disruptive, you need to make your own future. So make your own plans, execute those plans. You know your consumer, you know your market better than anybody else. So you should be in charge of the direction you head in. And that's like businesses like Amazon. They're not looking at what other people are doing. They're just deciding we're doing this and we'll just go ahead and do it. They're not obsessing what everybody else is doing. And that's what the most innovative companies doing. So stop following people, make your own future, make your own plans, execute those plans, and go on your own journey. It's a really strong message for any business who wants to innovate. But clearly, for the challenge of climate change, then we need to make a future. We need to make a planet which is habitable, and we need to plot that journey and make it now and start it and deliver some carbon savings pretty quickly to address the problem. So if we're going to innovate, there are fundamentally three things that we need. These are very general business focus, but obviously you could set this out for a climate change agenda. So the first thing you need in place is a strategy. So that's where is your business going and why is it going there? And that strategy needs to be communicated throughout the business so that people can look at what they do and how they operate and make sure that it's aligned to that strategy. The strategy needs to be credible, it needs to be believed, it needs to be delivered with charisma and bring people on that journey and get everyone aligned and pushing in the right direction. So having a strategy showing where your business is going is really important, and we should have a strategy for dealing with climate change. So that's the first thing you need in place for good innovation. The second place is the second point is a process. So how are you going to get there? So innovation and process is an innovation process is not an oxymoron. It's a process, is a tool that helps you innovate, and it's really how do you do your innovation. So you could look at innovation sprints. You use it generally 5 steps where you basically download a topic, you have ideation, you select an idea, you prototype that idea, you test it, then you launch it. And that's a good outline innovation process. So all businesses need innovation processes to basically organize their activity around innovation. And these processes need to be agile, they need to be easy to understand, and they need to be easy to implement, and everyone needs to be trained on how to do it, because you should be using everyone in your organization to help in your innovation effort. So we've talked about 2 of the key elements for innovation: a strategy and a process. The third one is a culture. And culture is absolutely the key thing. You can have the best strategy in the world, you can have the best processes in the world, but if your culture is not right, you'll not be innovative, and you will fail, and people won't like working with you, and you will definitely not fail. You will definitely not succeed, rather. And really, culture is kind of how does it feel getting there? How do people treat each other? How are people rewarded? What motivates people? To have a good culture, leaders in the business need to understand what motivates people, and they need to deliver tasks and activities that fit with people's motivation. So culture is really, really, really important. And today we live in a world where consumerism and having stuff is more important as a culture than having a planet that we can live in. And so there's a culture around innovation in respect to climate change. So really, culture is kind of that undefinable feeling when you're somewhere. So when you walk into an organization, when you talk to people, when you meet people, when you look at how people act, when you read emails, when you see how people interact with each other, you get a feeling of what it's like to be there. And if it's positive, then that's a really great energy. It's a positive environment, and that is what you need to create and sustain innovation. If it's not positive and there's a blame culture, people are not allowed to take risks, people are not motivated by what they're doing, then the culture is negative, and those organizations find it very, very difficult to be innovative. We should think as culture as being as important to a business as training is to an athlete. And really, culture is something that needs to be highly authentic. You can't just turn on a culture in a day. You can't just say we're going to have a positive culture tomorrow. It can only be built over time, and it has to include everyone at every level, because you can't have people saying things in leadership, but people at the ground level, at the bench level, not believing in that. And everyone has to be brought along, and everyone has to be part of the culture. It starts with the leaders, and it's about how the leaders inspire and interact with the staff. And it has to be across everything, otherwise it's just not authentic and it doesn't work. So part of culture is about being about being curious and exploring and taking experiments and understanding problems. And here's a famous Einstein quote that relates to innovation: if I now had to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and then 5 minutes about thinking about the solutions. So what he's saying is actually, to be innovative, it's really important to understand the problem in detail. If you understand the problem in detail and have empathy with your customer or consumer, then solutions actually become really, really quite obvious. So you have to spend most of your time having empathy and understanding problems, and then the solutions become really, really easy. That's what he's saying there. So if you want to have a positive innovation culture, you need to get your people out of your offices, to where your consumers are buying your products, where your consumers are using your products, where your consumers are talking to your products, and you need to get out there and meet them and listen to what they're saying and understand what the problems are, and only then you can improve your products and be innovative. And we like to think about that curiosity and the kind of the fuel for innovation is really, it comes in 2 types: one stimulus and one insight. So you need to have your people going out there collecting stimulus and collecting insight, and I'll explain the difference between the 2 things. Stimulus is really the kind of more tangible stuff. So it's about technology, it's about technologies, it's about trends, it's about reading publications, it's about looking at what your competitors are doing, changes in regulations, etc., etc. It's kind of like the tangible information and the what's possible in technology, etc. The problem with stimulus is it's really easy for all of your competitors to get exactly the same stimulus as you, because they're observing the same trends, they're looking at the same technology, they're reading the same books, they're looking at the same websites. So they're basically generating the same stimulus. On the other hand, we have insight, and insight is less tangible. It's about developing empathy. So it's about really understanding your consumer. It's about getting close to them. As I said earlier, it's about spending time with them, going to where they buy your stuff, how they access your products, and where they use it. And if you develop insight, then you really understand your consumer, you understand what the unmet needs are. And the best ideas combine both stimulus and insight. So in other words, they're not just technology-led, they're also addressing an insight that requires a deep understanding of a consumer. If you can get these two things together and get them right, you can have amazing innovation. So we can think of stimulus as being the fuel for ideas, but insight is the spark that sets the ideas on fire. And the best innovation has both stimulus and insight. I'll give you an example of this now. So MP3 players, when MP3 players came around, probably in the late 90s now, that was really an innovation that was driven by stimulus, it was driven by technology. So it was about storage, so it was about battery life, and it was about the kind of electronic devices that you could build that allowed you to carry your entire record collection around with you in an MP3 player. Now, at the time when MP3 players were first invented, there were a whole plethora of them on the market, and Apple were actually quite late to that market with their iPod. You had Sony, you had Creative, you had a whole range of people out there with MP3 players, and then Apple came along with iPod. Now, fundamentally, that innovation was driven by stimulus, it was driven by technology, which made it possible. Now, Apple did something which elevated their innovation with the iPod beyond all of their competitors. It was just about design. Yeah, sure, the iPod was a beautiful looking piece of kit, just like all Apple stuff is, but that's not what they did that was innovative. What they did that was really innovative was understand the customer, understand the consumer. They had an insight around music, which none of the competitors had. That insight was that everybody loves music. Music makes everyone feel great, but a significant number of consumers don't like buying music. They don't like buying music because they don't like going to record stores because they find it a judgmental environment. You know, music snobs look down on you if you buy a Madonna CD. That was an insight that Apple came up with, and it required them to spend a lot of time with music consumers and people who listen to music, and it actually led them to create iTunes. So not only did they produce a beautiful product in iPod, they also built a business model, and that business model was iTunes. And now, fast forward to where we are today, we see that iTunes and that business model of downloading and streaming music has effectively destroyed the old way that MP3 players were launched on, which is you buy a CD, you rip it to your computer, and you download it onto your device. They took away all of that just by creating a streaming platform, and that allowed them to make a hell of a lot of money, and that has effectively evolved over time. So now your iTunes is on your phone, and they continue to make money even though people don't buy MP3 players because they've got the iTunes store where you can buy music, and we now have Apple Music. So you can see how that's using stimulus and insight to create overall amazing innovation. So it's really important to generate that insight as well as just understand stimulus. So insight in the sense of climate change is understanding about people's lives, understanding what they're going to do, understanding how they're going to how they need to travel, how they need to heat their homes, how they need to consume products, and using that insight to deliver solutions which are going to save the environment, but also create beautiful and products that people are going to want to buy and use. Okay. Today we live in a world, call it modern capitalism, and fundamentally the central challenge to modern capitalism is how do we capture someone's attention? And the biggest companies in the world are using the smartest people in the world to use supercomputers to figure out where you're going to go and click. So fundamentally, we're looking at a digital world where everybody, all of the innovators in the world are trying to get you to their website, to their Instagram page. They're fundamentally competing for your attention so that you can buy their products, and that's often done by e-commerce. So we need to kind of like use that, the innovation and the techniques that we've developed in this modern capitalism to get people's attention, to create a narrative around climate change. So instead of selling them new consumer goods, sell them messages around climate change so that we can change people's behavior and address the problem. One example of a smart way that people are doing this is Netflix. So you may be aware that Netflix actually adapt the skin or the cover art that they use for their material. So if you take something like Stranger Things, different people will see different cover arts for that particular series on Netflix. And what Netflix does over time is it has a load of different iterations of the cover art, and they figure out based on what you click on when you're scrolling through Netflix, what kind of cover art appeals to you. So you see some here where this focus on the kids, some things are more darker, some things are more abstract. So basically Netflix serves up a cover art which is based on your kind of preference. It's learned using AI based on what you watch and what you've interacted with, and the cover art you tend to find appealing. There's just one example about how people are doing clever things to figure out how to get you into their products. So we need to take some of this really cool thinking and learning and apply it to climate change and get people to change their behavior. Now, that's fundamentally about creating campaigns to change behavior. There've been some really famous campaigns over the years. Sorry if this is the UK centric for view if you're not calling it from the UK, but here are some examples of campaigns that have changed people's behaviour. So the first one is 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. So it'd be very hard to find someone in the UK who doesn't know that it's healthy to have 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. That's because that campaign has been highly effective with a very simple message saying what the health benefits are for having that an improved diet. Another one is around drink driving. So again, in the 70s and early 80s, drink driving was prevalent, and there were lots of famous campaigns that were run using very hard-hitting imagery, like this one here with effectively a split screen of a morgue and someone in bed showing that basically drink driving kills people. That's changed behaviour over time, and now it's completely socially unacceptable to drink drive in the UK. Clunk Click Every Trip was again the 70s campaign around using seatbelts, and again, it's socially unacceptable not to wear a seatbelt in a car, not just for the driver, but for the passenger and the people in the back. And that was all done by creating a campaign. Fitbit do this as well with 10,000 steps. So again, it'd probably be difficult to find a person in most of the planet who doesn't know that physical activity is good for you. And that has been really driven by things like Fitbit and talking about things like 10,000 steps. And they've been able to use that campaign to inspire people to be physically more active and actually buy Fitbits and other activity monitors. And the last one was an NHS campaign in the UK about knowing your numbers, which is really a cardiovascular disease campaign about knowing your blood pressure. So if you're a man in the UK, then the chances are you're going to die of a heart attack. And the big risk factor in heart attack is blood pressure, and many people don't know their blood pressure. So it's telling people to get their blood pressure checked, and hopefully that changes behaviour over time, and people adapt their lifestyle so we have fewer cardiovascular problems in the country. So you can see how campaign thinking can be really, really effective. So we need to be using some of this creativity to leverage it against climate change. Okay, so that's talking about campaign thinking and how do we change people's behaviour using campaign and creativity. The next thing is just some trends that are happening in business. So we're now moving into a world where shameable business models are going to bring down ideas. And back in the 1970s, this guy Milton Friedman said it was basically a corporation's social responsibility to increase its profits, and that was pretty much done at the cost of anything else. So that was a message around generating wealth and employment. But now we're in a world where actually we're looking at a completely different future where we actually have to build sustainable business models. So moving forward, people are going to be looking at businesses, looking at what they do and looking at their sustainability. And it's going to be corporate suicide to do things that are not responsible and not looking after the planet. So we will see people innovating on this because it makes commercial sense and people will not want to be shamed. We're also now moving into a world where people are looking at moving away from car ownership and how we move and effectively providing mobility as a service. So in the EU, we actually have a target to say that we will reduce CO2 emissions by 40% by the year 2030, which is actually only 10 years away. And in order to do that, we need to move away from what we do today, which is we want a car, we want to have our own car, we want to have more than one car in the household, we want to have a better car every couple of years. So that's an unsustainable business model. It's not sustainable for the planet. And we have some great options for electric cars are getting cheaper and cheaper. still not cheap enough, but they need to get cheaper. We have things like Cruise, which is a US service, I think it's in San Francisco, which uses autonomous electric vehicles, and you basically just get into one and it takes you to where you want to be. So and journeys are shared, so it's a much more sustainable way to transport. We're looking at new business models. Volvo have just launched a subscription service for cars where you can basically get a new car, but you basically hire it for 3 months and 3 months at a time. It's a much more flexible way of car ownership, and hopefully moves to a point in the future where we don't necessarily have to own our own car, and there are other options for us to move around, because that's what we need to do from a sustainability point of view. So mobility as a service is going to be a key element of climate change. And another trend is the sharing economy. So the whole thing about everybody has to, we live in a world today where everyone has to have everything. So everyone's got a drill, everyone's got a lawnmower. So on every street, there are tens or hundreds of lawnmowers and drills. Yeah, we use these things once a week or once or twice a year. So why can't we move to a world where we share stuff? That would be much better for the planet. It would be more economical for us. And we'll see a growth of the sharing economy in the next few years. This is just one example called Borrow My Doggy, where people can effectively volunteer to take other people's pets for a walk because they want to enjoy taking a dog for a walk, and that reduces the burden on the pet owner, but also shares the love of the dog around. So that kind of thinking you can apply to all sorts of different types of products and services. So that's just some general stuff around innovation. The way we tend to think about innovation is a concept we call the 3Ds. So be disruptive, think differently, and embrace digital. And I'll explain each of those in a second. So first thing is be disruptive. So this is really about continually evolving your product, keep innovating. And if you keep innovating and moving your product on, you're defending against being disrupted. And if you're ambitious enough and you know your market and your consumer well, then you can keep your innovation relevant and keep moving it forward in line with what your market and consumers want. If you adopt the attitude where you're constantly trying to disrupt yourself, then you're much less likely to be disrupted by someone else. So this is a central piece of a central attitude that's going to help us address climate change, but also any type of innovation in the business. The second one is to think differently. So, anyone who works in an organization will tend to think quite similarly, because we tend to get a job because of our education or the way we're trained, or that we fit the archetype of a particular sector. And that's why so many companies are filled with people thinking exactly the same way. And really that ability, that lack of ability to think differently is basically causing them to innovate in a very narrow corridor. If we can free ourselves up from that and free ourselves from it and from the bias of our own situation and training and company and role, then we can start to think differently. We can start to come up with new innovations. And that's what we need to do with climate change. We need to think very differently about what we do today. And finally, we talk about embracing digital. So we're not saying that everything should be digital, because when you should only use digital where it makes sense. You could literally digitize anything, but you should only use it where it adds value to the experience. But everyone should be thinking about technology and digital because it offers such an amazing and diverse opportunity to be disruptive and to be innovative. It should be considered in anything that you offer. And technology is becoming more and more advanced all the time. So things we can't do today will be possible tomorrow. So we need to plug into it as innovators. And if we can provide things digitally, then that can often have a much lower climate impact than doing things physically. So think about GP appointments. We've been driven to digital GP appointments in the UK because of COVID, but that's effectively a carbon saving as well, because we're not traveling to the GPs, we're not using paper, so this kind of digital substitution can help save the environment too. Just to reiterate, technology will never be as slow as it is today. We know that technology is advancing all the time, and here's some data that supports that. So every 5 years, this research shows that technology becomes 32 more times advanced, which is significant. But in 10 years' time, it becomes 1,000 more times advanced. And in 20 years' time, it becomes 1,000,000 times more advanced. So, in 20 years' time, we will have serious climate change issues, but the technology that's available to us will be 1,000,000 times more advanced than it is today. So we should be able to address it in some way. So we need to adapt to that and figure out how we use technology to fix this problem and other innovation problems. The other thing about innovating is, where do you place your bets? There's a load of things you can do, but how do you know what you're doing is the right thing to do? there's usually no shortage of ideas, any particular organizational opportunities open to you, but you need to figure out what to do. And really your success over the long term really requires you to carefully select what you do and when you do it. And you shouldn't leave this to luck, and you should have some kind of process and way of figuring it out. The way we tend to think about innovation is over 3 horizons: so incremental innovation, adjacent innovation, and radical innovation. Incremental innovation is where you deploy an existing technology to an existing consumer or market. And it's important to do this because this will keep your current offering fresh and moving forward, so you continue to keep consumers happy. And adjacency is where you move to an existing technology or consumer or market, but it's one that you don't use today. So it exists in the world, it's just that you haven't deployed it yet. So you can move into adjacencies and help innovate in that way. And then the final, the furthest innovation horizon is radical innovation. And this is where you come up with a new technology or a new consumer or market or both, and you figure out a new way of doing things. And what you need to figure out where you place your bets. The received wisdom and the research shows that you should spend 70% of your resource on incremental innovation, keeping your existing customers happy, 20% moving into adjacencies, and 10% moving into radical innovation. Now, you might think that radical innovation is really, really hard and time-consuming and risky, but when it uses things like digital, actually, it can be done much sooner. Can often be done a lot quicker than traditional innovation. And the rewards are actually the opposite way around. So you get 70% of the rewards and the returns from the 10% of your resource you allocate to radical innovation. So that's your incentive for doing stuff that's radical. Now, so we think like basically incremental is doing what we do today better. So, when we think about the environment, so how do we travel better? How do we do that in a more sustainable way? Adjacencies would be adopting best practices and technologies from other areas and bringing them to other industries to make things more sustainable. And then radical innovation is really what we need to do to address climate change systemically, and that's brand new thinking, leading to brand new behaviors and using brand new technologies. And then we can really tackle climate change head on. That's the end of my presentation now. I'm just going to go back to the Waterline Summit. We're actually, this event's part of the Waterline Summit and you're participating in it. So wherever you found out about this event, you can access our live lab. So we're actually conducting a live lab during this week of the conference. We're asking for people to submit their ideas for climate change. And there are 5 grand challenges to climate change. If you go to our website, which is here, I'll show you the web address in a minute, then you can actually go to a virtual ideation board and put your own ideas up for addressing climate change challenges. We encourage you to do that because we want to take some of these ideas forward and help the Waterline Summit with that. And with that, I will leave it open for any questions. So we've got 5 minutes left. So if you've got a question, please feel free to stick it on the chat, or if you're feeling really brave, come off mute and ask us a question.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Just while we're waiting, I've just posted in the chat box, everyone, 2 links. The first link is to the Waterline Summit. It's a virtual exhibition, essentially. So you go up there and you register. It's completely free. There's loads of people exhibiting all cool stuff that they're doing around sustainability and climate change, etc. And our stand is there, the live lab that Rob was talking about. It's called the Live Lab. If you go to our stand, you can click through and essentially go to virtual whiteboards and stick up your ideas or suggestions or best practice that you've seen across the 5 grand challenges of climate change, which came from Bill Gates. So it covers manufacturing, and it covers transport, and it covers housing, and a couple of others. And essentially you can go in there and you can put your ideas up. And the idea is that Edenic Group are collecting all these ideas from all the attendees and then running them through our innovation process and hopefully turning these into pilot projects. And we collected about 200 ideas at last year's summit, and as a result we've got about 8 active projects that are in the pipeline at the moment. And ultimately, going back to Rob's portfolio point, we want to build a portfolio of projects in the Humber region that continues to innovate and tackle carbon emissions and tackle climate change. So that's kind of what the point is. And we, by taking ideas from everybody, we encourage them to think differently, and hopefully by participating, it helps change their thinking. The second web address on there is just to the Edenic Group website. So feel free to click through that. You can see exactly what we're about, what it is that we do, how we work with businesses and all that kind of stuff. But the fundamental point there is Rob was making is really it is a case of thinking differently and changing the culture, whether that's applying to how you run your business in terms of commercially, you know, what the future of that business is, rather than thinking sort of 2 or 3 years ahead. You might be thinking 50 or 100 years ahead. You know, where is that going to be, especially with the advancement of technology, and how are you adapting to that? But obviously, importantly, is also applying that exact same thinking to carbon emissions and climate change. You know, as organizations, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're doing the right thing, and encouraging that not only in terms of how we run our businesses and the processes we run, but also in terms of how we encourage our employees and our communities and the people that are around us to think differently about what they're doing. You know, could they be sharing more products? Could they be purchasing less? And actually, could you be offering your service in a different way that was more carbon friendly and more accessible and more applicable to the digital age that we're in? Just a note there from Tom. Tom, thanks very much. Given the scale and scope of the issue, who do you think has the credibility and reach to do this, and how can we influence that? Rob, can you see that question?
Yeah, well, Tom, that's a great question. I mean, fundamentally, we all need to be able to address this. So there's a responsibility for all of our current manufacturers to do things more sustainably. But you know, frankly, those guys make loads of money and they're kind of like stuck in their ways. So I personally think it's going to be new people. It's going to be some of the forward-thinking companies like, you know, Apple, Google, Samsung. I think those guys are genuinely leading in innovation. They've moved out of their original sectors of, you know, making computers, or, you know, in the case of Amazon, selling books. And they've got the might, the power, the resources to really tackle this. You know, you look at like Elon Musk, and you know, he's trying to put people on Mars. He's obviously developing space travel, which arguably is the opposite of sustainability. But he's obviously done things like Tesla. So you know, these guys have got the resources to do massive innovations. I think it's probably going to be those kind of visionary people who are going to address this challenge. There's obviously space for academia because we need new technology and we need clever people to fix things. But we know, generally speaking, academics are relatively slow. So I think it's a combination of using academic ideas with people who have the resources and the energy and the agility to innovate quickly. It's all about speed, frankly. And I personally think it's going to be companies like SpaceX, Tesla, Amazon, Apple. Those are the guys who've got the track record of doing things fast.
Yeah, I think it's all about collaboration, certainly. I mean, again, just touching back on the waterline thing, the whole point of that is it's academia, it's businesses, it's communities, it's specialists in all different areas, and the idea is to get all of those singing from the same hymn sheet. Because interestingly, what comes out of it is a lot of individual businesses or individuals generally are doing their own thing, what they think is playing their part for climate change or decarbonizing or offsetting, which I really don't like the term of, because offsetting is kind of a bit of a cop out, you know, really. You know, so but if you can get all of those working together in unity, you actually find that there's a lot of complements between them. But there has to be a desire to do that. And just before we came on this call, I was on a seminar this morning with the governor of the Bank of England and the CEO of Yorkshire Water and the CEO of Make UK, which is the big manufacturing body for the UK. And one of the interesting points that they made in that was that as much as engineers, for example, from a water treatment company such as Yorkshire Water, as much as engineers in terms of looking after grey products, i.e. piping and infrastructure to clean water and distribute it to the 5 million users that it has in the Humber, an interesting addition came out of that, which was what we actually need now are social, quote unquote, engineers. Because really it's influencing change and getting people to think very differently about the way that they're living and buying and purchasing and working and traveling and all that kind of stuff every day. So social engineers, and also in addition to that, digital engineers, because of the advancement of technology and the scale that it's moving, how quickly it's moving, all of those things need to work together. So you've kind of got the traditional infrastructure of the way the country works or the way that we live every day. You've got then the mindset that needs to be switched. It's really hard to get people, for example, not to drive their car and ride a bike. That's a really hard thing to make. You know, everyone says they want to do that, but how do you physically enable that and influence that change? And then how do you leverage really what is powerful in terms of digital technology and make that so accessible that Joe Blogs on the street wants to access that and use that in their daily lives, away from kind of the really high end boffins that are doing really cool stuff with machine learning or AI or whatever, that has to trickle down to become part of our everyday life and become systemic. So all of those points are things that need to weave together. And yeah, I think some of the big brands certainly have a responsibility to tackle that. You know, you take the likes of Amazon, who are essentially dominating the world. And amazingly, because, you know, the stuff they're doing today is because they were innovating 10 years ago, you know, so that's why we have what they've got. But, you know, in the same token, they then have a responsibility to try and influence change. You know, they're very much a consumerism brand. So how do they do that? When the fact that they're stepping into things like healthcare, you know, might well completely change the way that we even look at our own healthcare, maybe in only 5 years from now. So there's a lot of change going on, but I think coming together and getting everything to work as one is going to be a key thing. And so there has to be a central global message.
Yeah, well, I really like, just pick up on something you said there, like offsetting to me is completely the wrong behavior. Offsetting, all it allows us to do is continue doing what we're doing today with a little assuaging our guilt in some way. It's not really, you know, it's keeping it, it's basically treading water. And what we see with lots of big businesses today, they figure out, you know, they do big carbon plays and basically use that as a way to offset and continue to do what they're doing. They need to be rethinking about what they do fundamentally if we're going to address this challenge. And that can be driven by regulations. So we see the government taxing cars, you know, for CO2 emissions. You know, that will have to become more and more punitive over time to really change behaviour. The reason why we put some adverts in there is because one thing we know that incumbent businesses and consumer goods companies are really good at creating messages to figure out how to get people to buy more Coca-Cola or, you know, change the car every couple of years. You know, we need to create that, changing that creativity or pointing that creativity into changing, making behavior change more attractive and making that something that people want to do. So I think, you know, we have the skills to do it. It's just we need to figure it out.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Tom. See you later. Just before we log off, any other questions from anyone or any other comments that you'd like us to address? We're slightly over time, but we're happy to stick around for 30 seconds if anyone's got anything further. If not, then please feel free to visit the links that I've posted in the chat there. The Waterline Summit, go register. There's 2 days left of it. There's some really cool stuff, some really top-end speakers on there from all over the world that are talking about some really interesting stuff in terms of innovation and relation to climate. Or go visit the Edenic Innovations website, see what we do, see how we work with businesses and the methodologies and the services that we provide. And if you want to reach out to us afterwards, feel free to drop me an email. You'll see it from the Eventbrite information that you're getting sent out to you, and contact me and talk to me and ask questions, and we're happy to speak. So with that, I don't think there's any more questions. So Rob, thanks very much for taking us through that. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the week, guys, and thanks for attending. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.